Hello everybody, how are you? Hello everybody, how are you? It is time to start our day, it is time to work and play. Hello everybody, how are you? Hi everybody, welcome back. Today I think we'll talk about fairy tales. I like fairy tales. I bet you have heard fairy tales, seen fairy tales, acted fairy tales out, told a fairy tale to somebody. If you have ever read or had a fairy tale read to you, put your hands on your shoulders. If you've ever seen a fairy tale movie, let's put one hand on our head and one hand on our tummy. Fairy tales are fun, but what is a fairy tale? What makes something a fairy tale? We've all told and heard stories, but what makes a story, a regular story, different than a fairy tale? Let's take a look at some things that a fairy tale has that a regular story might not. Okay, first, a fairy tale usually starts with the words once upon a time or a long, long time ago. Those are things you might hear in a fairy tale. Then, when you start listening to the story or watching the story, here's some things that you might see. Usually, there's a castle. Can you see that castle way up on the hill there? Usually there's a castle and a king or a queen, a prince or a princess. And here you can see a knight fighting with a dragon. That's not something we see in real life, is it? Nope, that's part of a fairy tale. Also, part of a fairy tale could be fairies. Here's a picture of what a fairy might look like. We know in Cinderella she had a fairy godmother who looked a little different than this fairy, but they were all fairies. What else might you find in a fairy tale? Let's see. How about some talking animals? That's not something that we see in everyday life. That happens in stories, especially in fairy tales. You might have some talking pigs, some talking goats. You might have a talking donkey. You might have some talking wolves. You get animals that talk in fairy tales. And as I mentioned earlier, we said princes, kings, queens, and of course, princesses. There's almost always a princess in a fairy tale. There isn't always, but almost always there is. And a lot of times too, there's somebody really mean, whether it's an evil queen, an evil witch, there's almost always somebody who is mean. And one other thing that you find in fairy tales a lot are problems. Somebody is having a problem and they need help from somebody else. Then at the end of a fairy tale, almost always we hear the words, and they lived happily ever after. So those are some of the things that make up a fairy tale. Now, one thing that I think is pretty neat about fairy tales is you can hear the same fairy tale, the same story, told in different ways, different versions of it. If you have ever had a fight with somebody, maybe a brother, a sister, a friend, you probably say that one thing happened that caused the fight or during the fight, and they might say something different happened during the fight or caused the fight. Well, today we're going to read one fairy tale, but we're going to read one version and then another version, and we're going to see how they're different from each other and how they're the same. We are going to read the story of Little Red Riding Hood today. Now in this picture you see two of the characters. Do you see who's here? There's Little Red Riding Hood, and behind her is the wolf. Let's see what this version of the story tells us. This is Little Red Riding Hood and her mother. They live near a big dark forest. Her name comes from a bright red cloak. That's a coat. A cloak is a coat. With a hood that her granny made her. Please take this food to your granny. She's unwell in bed, says her mother. Go through the forest, but don't talk to any strangers you meet on the way. I hope she listens. Should always listen to your mother. Little Red Riding Hood waves goodbye. She walks into the forest with her basket. She doesn't see the big black wolf watching her from behind a tree. Now look closely at this bottom picture. Do you see the wolf hiding somewhere? He's kind of hard to see, but you can see his nose sticking out right there. I can see why she didn't see him. He is hard to see. Suddenly, the wolf is on the path. Where are you going? He asks. I'm taking this food to my granny, says Red Riding Hood, starting to feel scared. The wolf smiles a horrible smile. Oh, take your granny some flowers, he says. Red Riding Hood is even more scared. Yes, Mr. Wolf, she says. Now, do you remember what the last thing her mother told her was? not to talk to any strangers. Should she have stopped and talked to the wolf? I don't think so. I think her mother warned her against this. Red Riding Hood stops to pick up some flowers. The wolf smiles again, showing his sharp teeth. Then he runs away through the forest. He is very, very hungry. The wolf reaches Granny's cottage. Here's Granny's cottage. Granny is sitting up in bed. The wolf pushes open the door and he runs in. Oh no, he gobbles up Granny in one gulp. He climbs into Granny's bed. He puts on her nightcap and glasses. He pulls up the quilt and he waits for Red Riding Hood to come. He's trying to trick her. Red Riding Hood knocks on Granny's door. "It's me, Granny," she says. "Come in, my dear," calls the wolf in a squeaky voice. "I'm in my bedroom." "Hello, Granny," says Red Riding Hood. Then she stares. "What big eyes you've got," she says. "All the better to see you with," says the wolf. "What big ears you have," says Red Riding Hood. "All the better to hear you with," squeaks the wolf. Red Riding Hood drops her flowers. She is very scared indeed. "What big teeth you have," she says. "All the better to eat you with." Red Riding Hood screams, but the wolf gobbles her up. Then he gets back into bed. A woodsman hears the scream. He runs as fast as he can to the cottage. He goes into the door and straight into Granny's bedroom. He sees the wolf and kills it. Inside the wolf are Red Riding Hood and her granny. They are alive and very happy to be rescued. "Thank you for saving us," says Granny. The wolf can never scare anyone again, and they all sit down at the table to have cake and coffee and live happily ever after. Well, something else happened in that story that can't happen in real life. The wolf gobbled them up, but at the end of the story, they came out of his tummy and they were fine. So that's not a real thing, is it? That's something that kind of happens in a story or a fairy tale. So when we read this story, when we read this version of it, we had Little Red, we had her granny, and we had the wolf. And the wolf was mean from the start, wasn't he? He tried to trick her, and then he ended up deceiving her at Granny's house and eating Granny and Little Red Riding Hood. He has some different thoughts about the story, though. He said that's one way that people say it happened. He said there was some other stuff that the story left out that he wants to share with us now. So we're going to read his story. It's called, "Honestly, Red Riding Hood Was Rotten." He's going to tell us what he thinks happened that day. So if we look at the front of the book, though, let's take a quick peek. We still have Red Riding Hood, we still have Granny, see Granny in the back, and we still have the wolf. The characters are the same. Let's see if the story stays the same or if it's a little bit different. Chomp, chomp. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just finishing my lunch. My name's Wolf, Big Bad Wolf. You may have heard the story of Little Red Riding Hood, about a girl and her granny. Seems everyone has. My tale is different. Did I say tail? I meant tail. You see, the word tail can be two ways. It can be the tail on his body or the story tail. And he meant his story is different. Once upon a time, I ran out of food, completely. The cupboards were bare, the freezer too, and I'd eaten my very last vegetable and fruit in the garden, every one. Other wolves might have lunched on little forest critters, chipmunks, bunnies, squirrels, but I'm a vegetarian. That's right, I don't eat meat. Well, I try not to. I love apples, Honeycrisp, Pink Lady, Golden Delicious, any kind, really. But sadly, it was a long time until apple harvest. I hadn't eaten in weeks. My stomach growled and howled. It moaned and groaned. It even roared. Then my nose took over. I took a whiff. What was it? Oh, a girl. I took a whiff. What was it? Oh, cake and butter. Is this in this forest? I had to investigate. And there she was, Little Red Riding Hood. She looked as plump and juicy as a big, sweet apple. So far we've got a hungry wolf, really and truly just wanting to eat an apple. And here comes Red Riding Hood looking like one. So maybe he's just confused. Let's see. Little Red waved her cape. "Isn't it pretty?" she said. "Yeah," I said. "Aren't I pretty?" she said. Was she admiring herself in that puddle? Wow, with this cape, she said, I'm even prettier than usual. Oh boy, someone was sure full of herself. My stomach growled. Little Red twirled a strand of hair. Mother says the cape looks grand with my skin. My skin shines like pearls. Or the meat of a ripe apple, I thought, licking my chops. Remember, I hadn't eaten in weeks. Time to chomp. But then Little Red said, I can't wait until Granny sees how pretty I am today. I'm bringing her cake and butter from Mother. My stomach howled. 2 meals. I thought Granny for breakfast, Little Red for lunch, and cake and butter for dessert. Where does Granny live? I asked. Little Red pointed. Down there in the clearing, the brown house. Oh, I knew that house, and I had a plan. Let's play a game, I said. Little Red smiled. I'm awesome at games. I bet you are, I said. You take this path. This one says this path. I'll take that path. And let's see who arrives at Granny's first. Oh, I will, she said. I'm the prettiest and the fastest. I bet you are, I said. My stomach moaned. Before it groaned, I ran. No one knows the forest like I do. I chose the shorter path. I took a whiff. What was it? Apple air freshener? Tap, tap. I knocked on the door. Who's there? Called out a voice. Your granddaughter, I squeaked. I brought you cake and butter from Mother. Door's open, Granny said. Granny tugged at her nightcap. Green, she said. Isn't it pretty? Pretty like a Granny Smith apple, I thought. Aren't I pretty? Granny said. You must have heard the saying, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Well, it's true. My stomach moaned. What's that noise? Granny asked. Chomp, chomp. I had to eat her. She was no Macintosh apple, but not too bad. But I still felt hungry. Tap, tap. Little Red knocked at the door. Who's there? I called out, crawling into Granny's bed. Your granddaughter, Little Red said. I've brought you cake and butter from Mother. Door's open, I said. Little Red walked in and caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Isn't my cake pretty, Granny? She said. Aren't I pretty? I clenched my teeth. Granny, Little Red said. What deep, dark eyes I have. I said. The color of apple seeds. Granny, she said. What perfect ears I have. I said. Shaped like sharply cut apple slices. Granny, she said. What pretty red lips I have. I said. Red delicious. Granny, she said. What lovely skin I have. Ready? Chomp, chomp. I ate her up. What could I say? Things look different when you're hungry. She was no Fuji or Crispin apple. In fact, to be honest, she was a bit rotten. But she was better than nothing. Plus, I got dessert. And that's where that story ends. Nobody comes in to rescue them. So what was the same? We said that Granny was there, Little Red was there, the wolf was there. Little Red was going to see Granny through the woods. And the wolf beat her to the house, and he ate Granny, and he disguised himself and then ate her. Those parts were all the same. Let's think about some things that were different. Let's see. Well, there was no woodsman, like we said. There was nobody to come and get them out of the wolf's stomach at the end. In the second story, there was no mother at the beginning telling her not to talk to strangers. That was something that was different. And you know what else was kind of funny in the second story? Little Red and Granny, they didn't even seem to care about the wolf. Little Red in the first story was scared. She wasn't scared in the second story. She was just so worried about what she looked like and was watching herself. And in the second story, the wolf wasn't just trying to eat her. He was just starving and wanted something, and she looked like his favorite food, an apple. So which story do you think is the right one? The second one we read that was told by the wolf, or the first one that we read that just told us the story? You can vote on Facebook. Let's see what you think. Who was telling us the truth, the wolf or the first story? I'll put that out on Facebook, and you guys come and vote and let me know what you think. Some other things that we could do together today, or you could do later, we can make a basket like Little Red did. On Facebook, your grown-up can print this off, or you don't even need to print this off. You could just do this with a piece of paper. but this is waiting for you on Facebook. It's a paper with lines, and it has picnic baskets going across the top and upside down ones going across the bottom. Now, if I fold this in half, I'm going to match the picnic baskets. Let me show you. I'm going to give it a quick pull on there. Picnic baskets there. Now those aren't upside down anymore, and the lines are there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my scissors, and I'm going to cut on the line, but I stop when I get to the picnic basket. See, I didn't go all the way through. I'm going to do it again. Stop at the basket. I'm going to keep going. I have 2 more lines. Stop at the basket. 1 more. Okay, now look at what I have when I open this. My paper has all these slits in it. What I'm going to do with that, there's another paper. You can either do this on your own again, or you can print this off of Facebook. I'm going to cut this line, but this time, when I cut the line, I'm going to cut it all the way to the top so it cuts off. Let me do 1 more. I'm going to cut it from the bottom to the top so it cuts all the way off. Now I'm going to take my red strip and I'm going to weave into this paper and make a basket. Weaving is when I'm going to start on top. I'm going to go over, under, under. I keep switching. Over, whoops, that one was under, so now I go over, under, and I get all the way down to the bottom. Now I have a little extra there that I could cut off if I wanted to. Now let me take my second one. I'm going to do it the opposite. Since this one was over, I'm going to go under first. Then I go over, under, and I keep pushing the paper through. Over, under, and I'm going to end on over. Now, like I said, if I wanted to, I could come back and I could trim these off so they match the, there we go, and I could trim off down here. And if I needed to even, I could take a little piece of tape and I could tape them down if they're going to be falling out or anything. So once I've gone all the way across, I will do the rest of them. I'm going to take them, fold it, and I can staple this end. Maybe. Okay, and then I can staple this end, and you know what I'd have? Mine's not very good because I'm going quickly, but you guys can do this at home. You might need a grown-up's help. And you can make a basket. You can have your own basket that you can put fruit in, anything you want to carry to grandma, to grandpa, to your brother, to your sister, wherever you'd like. And then later today, you can retell the story. You can act out the story with your basket. And you can pretend one of your family members can be the wolf, one of you can be Little Red, one of you guys can be Granny, and you can use your basket to take food to Granny. Now, something cool I want to share with you before we go. Do you know that in other parts of the world, they do carry their food in baskets, but not with their hands? They carry their food in baskets on their head. So if you have a basket like this, maybe you could try that. You can put some pretend food or some real food in your basket and try to walk with it on your head. See if you could do it without hands. Oh, I got it to balance. Try to walk with it like that. See if you can do that. It's a hard thing to do, and some people have to walk a far distance with it like that. I think if I were walking, I would need my hands. That's a hard thing to do. Have fun making your, oh, I've got one more thing I almost forgot. Also on Facebook, you can help Little Red get to Granny's house with a maze. A maze is fun because it's challenging. You have to really think about what you're doing. Here's Little Red at the entrance to the forest, and here's Granny's house at the other end of the forest. Now, it would be easiest just to take your crayon and draw a straight line from Little Red to Granny's. But with a maze, you don't get to do that. You have to follow the white path. And if you get to a black line, you have to stop, turn around, and go back. You can only go on the white parts. So you can use your finger, you can use a crayon, a pencil, and try to help Little Red get down to Granny's house by going through the maze. All right, guys, have fun, and I will see you next time. Bye, everybody.